Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to the Tattooed Chap. Today, we're going to do an interview with Dr. Dan Morrison and talk about race and racism in America and how we can navigate this hot button issue. So make sure to tune in, learn something new, grab a cup of coffee, and let's get started. Hey everybody, this is Drew and welcome to the Tattooed Chap. I got my good friend here with me today, Dr. Dan Morrison. Welcome, Dan. How's it going?
Doing pretty well. How about you?
Doing good. So, one thing that's interesting about us is I feel like we've been friends for a long time, but we've only met each other once.
Right.
We met each other like on an online forum, probably 5 or 7 years ago now.
Yeah, something like that.
And just kind of had a shared interest in theology and those types of things. And then we met each other at a conference. Was it 2.5 years ago now?
Yeah, about almost 3. Yeah.
Yeah, almost 3. And we had lunch together or breakfast or something like that. We saw each other a few times, and then we haven't seen each other since. But I feel like you're a person I admire. One, we can look at your background a little bit, but you're a highly intelligent person and you've studied a field that I like to study. And you're a leader in that, a thought leader for sure in that area. And you've just always been a person I admire. And so I wanted to talk to you about an issue today. And we're going to be talking a little bit about race and the race issues that we see in America, and maybe try to figure out what can we do as people to kind of bring healing and reconciliation. But before we jump into that, 2 things. You're a Navy chaplain. I'm an Army chaplain. That's pretty cool. So go Army, beat Navy. And then so anything that we say is really just our own kind of thoughts on it. It's not like military endorsed or anything of that nature. It's just 2 guys talking to each other. So we need to have that little caveat. And so why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
All right. Well, I'm Dan Morrison. Yeah. People call me doctor. I'm like, no, I'm Dan.
Yeah.
I'm originally from Alabama. So born in Alabama, reared in Alabama. Yes, I was taught to say reared, not raised. You raise corn, you rear children, is what I was always told. I attended the University of Alabama, so I'm a huge Crimson Tide fan. But don't stop the video for those of you who are watching right now. It's okay. Things I enjoyed doing, though, throughout my time. I started lifting weights in high school, got really into that, still enjoy it. I'm starting to feel age affect my body a little bit, it seems. So I'm like, oh, okay, I can't lift what I used to lift sometimes. And other times I'm like, yes. But I'm that person who you'll find in the gym, but I'm also digging into books a lot. Mm-hmm. I enjoy programming. I dabble in that from time to time.
I didn't know that. I learned that about you today.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Like, I'm full of surprises. Just wait.
Okay.
And I'm single. I have no kids. Mm-hmm. And I just sort of do life, having served in higher education. Sometimes people are like, you sort of act like your students, especially your freshmen, are your kids. And I'm like, not quite. We're not going to go there.
Right.
So for the past few years, I've been serving as assistant professor of New Testament and expository preaching at Evangel University. Mm-hmm. I actually, like I said, I attended the University of Alabama. I did a bachelor's degree in classical applied mathematics and a minor in computer-based research. So that's where the whole nerding out comes from.
Okay. That makes sense.
I attended the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary, did my MDiv there with an emphasis in preaching. And then I decided to trek up to Canada to actually work on my PhD in Christian theology at McMaster Divinity College.
Okay.
Yeah. Going north of the border, that exposed me to a lot of other things too. Oh, yeah. So I've learned poutine, not bad.
Some
I
love
that potato chips.
Yeah. So
flavors of which you've never heard.
So the interesting thing is, so I grew up in Washington, but I grew up in a very remote area back before everyone had satellite and internet, because the internet didn't exist yet. So the only TV I got growing up was 3 Canadian stations, and because we grew up right on the Canadian border. And so I used to have a Canadian accent. The Army made fun of me until I got rid of it.
Oh,
um,
wow.
and then like things like poutine. I love watching curling on TV. Like it's like the
Yes.
coolest sport in the world. Hockey. My favorite football team's the BC Lions,
Oh,
and
wow.
out of the Canadian Football League. And I also like the Blue Jays for my baseball team. You know, I've adopted the Seahawks since we've become a little bit more globalized with through technology and stuff. But interesting
Stick
fact
with the
about
Blue Jays. Stick with the Blue Jays.
so okay, so I didn't realize that you did yours at McMaster's, but that's cool.
Yeah. And as I, look at things, I am finding that the more I figure out that I know, the more I figured out that I don't know.
Yeah,
And there's a whole world of exposure out there. And so as I walk through life and I meet people of different cultures, I was involved in Chi Alpha for a number of years as a student, which is a campus ministry.
right,
And I actually worked with them after I graduated from undergrad before going to seminary. And so we focused on a lot of different things. One of them was international student ministry. So I got the opportunity to meet people from all around the world. And that I think has helped shape my worldview in a number of ways.
right. Yeah, no, I can attest to that too. Being stationed in different countries around the world and uh, and getting to see Vancouver, Washington, or Vancouver, Canada, Victoria, Canada, versus Seattle. Even there's like a world of difference, and it's been pretty eye opening getting to see those different cultures and growing right up, growing up right next to a Native American reservation. My
Mhm,
sister marrying into that reservation or to that tribe, and my nephews and all that stuff walk that line of two different cultures.
mhm.
It's pretty eye opening to get to see things from different people's perspectives that maybe weren't your own growing up. For
Yeah.
sure.
I think that's the huge thing about living in what I like to call a globalized society.
Yeah.
Like we're global, yet we're local. And because of all the interconnectedness, we are able to hear the voices of people that we would not have been able to hear beforehand.
Right. Yeah. Well, uh, one of the things that one of the reasons why we brought you on and what we already mentioned is that we want to talk a little bit about race and what that looks like in America and how we can maybe get to a place of healing.
Mhm.
And as we were talking before we started this video, is you can't really um, have a solution unless you know what the problem is, if that makes sense, right? You
Right,
can't get to a place of healing unless you know what the cancer is or the wound is.
right.
And I think in the last few days, we had a story that kind of popped up on the news, and it was a situation that happened a couple months ago. Ahmed, it like was out for a jog, and he was gunned down for no reason by
Mhm.
three guys.
Right.
And hey everyone, my daughter just woke up. Hold on a second. It's still hi. It's pretty early. I need you to go back to bed. Okay, please go back to bed. Get in trouble because it's not time to be awake yet. Sorry, y'all. It's it's 5:30 my time or 6 o'clock my time. It's not time to be awake yet at my
Okay.
house.
Please tell me you're gonna leave that. I love it. You're gonna be in trouble if you don't go back to
Hey, it's real life, up, man.
bed. The
But
joys of parenting, right?
yes, yes. And she's crying now, and I feel bad. But
Oh,
sometimes that's part of being a parent. So, anyways, every it seems like going back to what happened, and like even as of yesterday, like those two guys that did it weren't arrested, and it seems like they got away with murder, literally. And
mhm,
um, and but late last night they were both arrested, and I think it was because this video got out there. But it seems like this is like a reoccurring theme, and the story is different every single time. Like, uh, but it's not different, if that makes sense. And
right.
um, so why why do you think we keep on having these similar cases that keep popping up? Why is this an issue? And like how big of a problem is this? I'm coming from a small town in the very northwest tip of Washington
Right.
where I didn't see this kind of stuff growing up, and I don't even necessarily understand it because like I was mentioning to you, I didn't know anyone that was Black until I was in middle school because we had
Mhm.
one family in town type
Right.
thing. So, yeah.
I think it flows from a couple of different things. One of the questions I ask people, and so for your example, why was there only one Black family in your town? Like,
Right. Yeah.
that's the question that people don't want to actually ask or answer a lot of times. I think that, in the town where I live right now, there is it's pretty monochromatic. I described it the other day to someone. They said, "Well, I think where you live is pretty diverse," and I said, "It's as diverse as a fly in buttermilk."
Hmm.
I mean, that's the framework. But then I said, if you go back in time 114 years,
Hmm.
on Easter Sunday, 3 Black men were lynched in the town square.
Hmm.
Do you think that might have some impact on the
Hmm.
diversity of an area?
Right.
And so when I look at it, that type of activity actually plays into this whole theme of what we're talking about today. Why does this seem to happen so often? What's the bigger narrative? I think that this is the narrative of American history.
Right. Yeah.
Because when you look at the history of this country, for you to, kill a Black person didn't mean anything. I mean, you could do it. There's no problem, no issue.
Hmm.
Eh,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
dead. Okay, it doesn't matter. I mean, think about this for a moment. When we look at the idea of citizenship within the country,
Hmm.
mm, Black people weren't granted citizenship
Right.
until after the Civil War, and that still took a while. I mean, I think it was the state of Mississippi not until a few years ago actually, it's like, oh yeah, wait a minute, that whole anti-slavery thing, maybe we should sign off on this.
Wow.
I mean, and that's been within the past, I want to say 5 years,
Wow.
that it was finally, oh wait, did we ever actually agree to this? N- No, we didn't. You
Wow.
think we should? I mean, it is the 21st century.
Hmm.
That's the type of thing that we look at and we see. So I actually have a friend who is in higher education, and he reminds his students on a
Hmm.
consistent basis that he is the first person in his family to be born in a quote unquote post segregation era. Like, after segregation was, deemed illegal,
Hmm.
he was born. He's not that old.
Right. Something that was interesting is when I was in college, I took a course called Race and Justice,
Mhm.
and it was just looking at constitutional laws and like where the Supreme Court looked at cases to bring about, like where there's reversals and
Mhm.
precedences set based in law. And a lot of the stuff that we would see as like that we'd be outraged, you'd see these cases, and it was like sometimes some of them are in the 60s. A lot
Mhm.
of them were in the late 70s, some of them even into the mid 90s, late 90s, I mean,
Right.
80s, sorry, late 80s. And you're looking at like some cases, you're like, dude, this is a total like, I don't even know how this went on. Like that was my mindset.
Right.
But
Now, here's the thing. You have to remember that most of those same people are still alive and are around
yeah,
today.
yeah,
And so when people say, "Oh, well, we're in a post-racism era, we're a post-racial world," I'm sitting here thinking, no, there are people I can point to
hmm,
who were outside of schools chanting 2468, we don't want to integrate,
hmm,
who are still around.
right,
And so I think I think that part of the situation is we have fooled ourselves as a society into saying we have come so far. Has there been progress? Yes. Have we made movement in the right direction? Absolutely.
hmm,
But we are nowhere near as far as we think we've come.
right,
And I think that's the huge issue. So when I look at what society has set up and how we explore and look at the idea of race, one of the things that we have been taught within our contemporary society is we just don't talk about race.
right,
So, how can you actually address the issues that are associated with race, racism, or any other form of discrimination for that matter, if we don't actually talk about it? You can't address an issue you don't talk about.
right.
And so as I look through history, we find this common narrative. And it's sad to say, but I will talk to some of my Black friends whenever something like this happens. We're like, okay, so what's the narrative this time?
Right.
And sadly, the narrative is so common, we can usually pinpoint and say, okay, someone's going to make an announcement about this, someone's going to do this, and here's where it's going to go.
Hmm.
And within about 90% of our details, we're usually right.
Right. I mean, in this whole situation with Ahmed is like he was like there was a burglary. Like I mean, like it's like we're painting the narrative that he was a bad guy and he deserved it somehow or some way,
Right.
and these
And
guys were justified in running down a person with their vehicle and then shooting him. I mean,
right.
that's not like is that justifiable for anybody that robbed anywhere? And Ahmed didn't even do that, but is that even justifiable if he was? But yeah, that you kind of see that kind of narrative every single time.
So in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, here's what I find interesting. The description is, okay, there was a Black guy who allegedly robbed someplace,
Yeah.
who was burglarizing houses in the neighborhood. So Ahmaud is going by, and you find, oh, wait, Black man, he must be the one.
Yeah. Oh man.
I mean, this is where the logic comes in. But this is all too common
Hmm.
because, all Black people look alike, in case you didn't know that. And I say that like on a halfway serious point because that is actually the framework that people
Hmm.
function on. Well, since all Black people look alike, well, this guy is Black, and we think that there was a Black guy who was robbing a house, so this must be the person. So let's go and take care of this situation.
Hmm.
I will tell you, not an uncommon thing throughout history.
Mm.
We'll just take care of it. And here's the issue. When citizens take care of the situation, there is now no ramification because dead people can't testify.
Right. Yeah.
I think that what we have to do is recognize, and until we get here, it's not going to be possible. We have to recognize the humanity of all people,
Yeah.
not just, to use a term from Star Trek, not to just see another humanoid that's not a human, but, oh, wait, no, this is another person
Hmm.
created like I am, who has rights like I do.
Hmm.
And until we get to that point, there's no discussion that can be had.
Right. So, you and I both come from a Christian worldview.
Mhm.
Like I think, and also just like kind of being in this current culture and age,
Mhm.
is it just a social media thing? Is it just a historical thing? Is there other dimensions to it that maybe sometimes we're not addressing that we need to address as well?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
like the spiritual dimension, things of that nature, and like what kind of role does maybe some of that kind of stuff play into it?
I think that that's very true. I think that what we have to do as Christians
Hmm.
is to follow the gospel.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is this. I would dare say, just based on, I'm going to speak in broad generalities for a moment. When white people read the Bible, oh yeah, you have spiritual freedom in your life. There's spiritual deliverance in your life.
Hmm.
There's spiritual victory in your life, because that's what it boils down to. It's all a spiritual thing.
Hmm.
When Black people in general read the Bible, wait a minute. The Exodus is where God brings deliverance to his people. Okay, we are serving God. Therefore, deliverance should come not only to my spiritual life,
Hmm.
but to my life as I live it. Therefore, I am not called, because I am a follower of Christ, to live under the oppression of another person in the way that I've been living under it.
Right.
So there's a cultural means by which people are reading scripture, and I would say reading scripture differently,
Hmm.
where the practical implications of daily living as a Christian, I think, are much more pronounced amongst Black Christians,
Mm.
and even I would even say Black and Brown Christians, than
Mhm.
they are amongst most white Christians within the culture.
Yeah. For
Does that
those
make
that,
sense?
yeah, definitely. And for those that maybe aren't familiar with the term Exodus, that's referring to when the Israelites were in slavery and under bondage to Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and God came and delivered them. But for a long time, they were like asking, when God, why God? And they were looking forward to that time of deliverance. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of the context that we're talking right now. So,
And so I'll say Black Americans took that framework of slavery
mhm.
in the Old Testament. They took that framework of slavery in the Bible, and they said, wait a minute, this actually applies to our lives right now in America as people who have been enslaved.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
And so that leads you to reading the Bible in a fashion that says, okay, what are the implications of this? I remember teaching a class, um, a book study to my students in undergrad. And what ended up happening was at the end of the semester, because we were covering, the book of Luke and the book of Acts in the New Testament. And I literally had students stop and tell me, I never knew that these two books of the Bible talked so much about the poor.
Right.
I never thought about how the Bible speaks to our economic practices of the day. I never considered that the Bible really speaks to the elevation of the downtrodden and speaks of speaking up for the poor and for the oppressed. And
Mhm.
so all of these things come together. So if the Bible is telling me to speak up for the poor and for the oppressed and for those who have no voice,
Mhm.
then as a Christian, it becomes my responsibility to utilize my voice to
Right.
speak to those issues that are going on in contemporary society.
Right. No, totally. Yeah, I can definitely see like how our different upbringings, the
Mhm.
region that we were raised in, what we witnessed. I mean, if whether we were born in America or a different country, how we read the texts, certain things are going to pop out and be much more um, like forefront in our thoughts, and we're going to
Right.
identify with maybe different characters or
Mhm.
people groups within the text of the Bible, and I can see how that can give hope or how we might be actually blind to certain things that are actually right in front of us. And yeah, definitely.
One one of the things that we also have to address within particularly this issue of discrimination, race, and the Bible as Christians, and this is a huge debate going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do those other readings that might unveil things that I don't see, are
Hmm.
they still legitimate reason? Are they still legitimate readings
Right.
of the text? And I've encountered Christians, particularly white theologians, who have said, no, this is an illegitimate reading of the
Hmm.
text. And
Yeah.
so we always have to come back and say, okay. And I've had to critique Black students and Asian students when students are talking about the material and
Hmm.
they see different things based on the lens of their experience. That is a legitimate reading. It's just not your reading because you come from a different culture.
Yeah. And so to hit on that, like it's not just when we read the Bible, but we have those lenses when we encounter anything really that we encounter through
Precisely.
this world, right? So
Mhm.
when we look at social media, certain things we're going to just scroll right past. It's not a big deal because my background, my region, my worldview. Same with news, but certain things we're going to latch on to. And I
Mhm.
think maybe where we're talking about, there's and what I see is that we just kind of talk past each other and we don't really slow down and really listen and try to see it from the other person's perspective. And so we keep on being stuck in the problem, if you will,
Mhm.
because we're not listening and hearing that there is a problem, you know,
Right.
and we're creating other problems by not listening.
Right.
But yeah, so
I mean, in these conversations, one of the biggest things that I always encounter, and I tell people this Once I can point it out, especially if that conversation is in writing or we're texting or
Mhm.
emailing back and forth, I often find myself saying, "You're not actually responding to the issue that I'm raising."
Right. Yeah.
Because we move in, shields up, I have to defend
Mhm.
my position.
Right.
I have to defend my tribe. I have to defend. And so it suddenly becomes this point of deflecting. And I think that within social media and the news,
Mhm.
we are going to do those things where we scroll by things that don't directly speak to us. But I think that the important thing to do is, you know, the Bible tells Christians to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And I
Mm.
think that's where our failure to live out the message of Christianity really comes into play.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because sometimes we'll look at people and say, "Why are you over there crying?
Right.
What's there to cry about? Get up. Let's keep going."
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute. I need to take a moment. And then there's this estrangement within the community of faith
Mhm.
because people feel like, well, you shouldn't be crying. You shouldn't be offended. You
Mm.
shouldn't be. And I think it's sort of like in the framework of any relationship, particularly a marriage.
Right. Yeah.
If your wife tells you, "I feel hurt by this,"
Right.
I don't think the appropriate response is going to be, "Well, you shouldn't feel that way."
Right. And give some logical reason on why she shouldn't.
Right.
Yeah.
It's because you cannot delegitimize someone's
Right.
feeling.
Right.
And I think that that's where the key comes in. We have to actually listen to people. And
Mhm.
I might not agree with your perspective on everything,
Right.
but that does not mean that I cannot hear your perspective.
Yeah.
I'm one of these people, I study language use.
Mhm.
And when I look at social media and I look at the news, here's one thing I have come to:
Mhm.
there is no neutral way by which to present any idea.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah.
And so when I look at any kind of communication, any visual images, text, I'm always looking at this whole idea of what biases, conscious or unconscious, might I add,
Mhm.
are there being portrayed in what's being communicated.
Right.
And when you look for the conscious or the unconscious bias, and people are like, but there's no such thing as unconscious bias. Trust me, there is.
There is. As a
It's
person
like,
that studied psychology, I know that there is. And if you don't think
I'm
there
like,
is,
okay,
that's your unconscious bias telling you that there is.
precisely. And I think that's the key thing right there. And so I think that there are a number of unconscious biases that are within our society
Mhm.
that we have not addressed.
Mhm.
I think that we have to, you know, I'm just going to say it. Anytime a Black person is shot,
Mhm.
thank you for your thoughts and prayers. Now get up off your do something and do something. Do nothing and do something is my framework right now,
Right.
because of the fact that I'm like, yeah, we got thoughts and prayers.
Mhm.
Thoughts and prayers did not stop segregations on buses.
Right.
There was a boycott that actually prompted that.
Right.
The legal case of Brown versus the Board of Education.
Mhm.
I mean, thoughts and prayers are great.
Right.
Thoughts and prayers did not bring about what I would call the failed experiment of public school integration.
Right.
People actually had to do something. And so, it's like that book of the Bible called James in the New Testament. You say you got faith, I
Right.
got works. I'm going to show you my faith by my works.
Right.
And I think that in so many ways, what we have done is we've given thoughts, prayers, good vibes. And for that, I give an applause.
Mhm.
At the same time, what are you going to do or say, or
Right.
how are you going to act in this situation?
Right.
And I believe that is the key issue. There has to come a point where we act, because I think a lot of times we try to get to reconciliation,
Mhm.
but how can something be reconciled if it's simply not addressed?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we were talking about that before we started recording. Like a doctor can't cure someone or bring healing to a body unless he knows what the wound or the issue is.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing like in communications, like when I'm doing marriage counseling, like, okay, like we can't really make this marriage better unless we can get to like, what are some of the root issues? We can't just like,
Right.
oh, he's like, she's angry because I don't take out the trash. Well, it's probably more than just that you're not taking out the trash. The
Right.
fight didn't start because of that. There's something deeper. Let's dig. What is that thing? And
Mhm.
and oftentimes we just want to look at the surface and say, and then yell at each other and say we don't understand each other and all that kind of stuff because we're just looking at the surface thing. But if we start digging deeper, then we can see that there's something a lot more, and then we can actually
Mhm.
start addressing it. Yeah.
You mean we need to stop trying to just deal with symptoms and deal with the actual issue?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And if you only deal with the symptoms and you don't deal with the issue, like in the medical world, oftentimes that can lead to death.
Mhm.
Um, because it's the issue that's causing the symptoms. And so I'd say, like, even in America, if you want to use that similar analogy, if we
Mhm.
just keep on yelling at each other about the symptoms and only address the symptoms, and we don't get down to the root and to the like and dig deeper, it
Mhm.
may lead to death, if you will, of some form or another, or at
Right.
least at the very minimum, it's going to stay dead and not come to life like many of us want. You
Right.
know.
It's interesting because a lot of these discussions, more often than not, revolve around statistics.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I have consistently done is I make it a point to avoid the use of statistics because I do not want to dehumanize anyone
Right.
and simply turn them into a number.
Hmm.
At the same time, when I look at the stories of people's lives in my own story, I will tell you my first car, well, actually, it
Hmm.
wasn't a car, my first vehicle
Uh-huh.
that I had was a minivan.
Cool.
It was a baby blue Dodge Caravan.
Very cool.
My mother got me that vehicle because that way most people would simply think I was some random soccer mom as long as they didn't
Uh-huh.
see me
Uh-huh.
because I'm driving a minivan.
Hmm.
As a black teenager in Alabama, she was very intentional
Mm.
about the type of vehicle I drove.
Oh, wow.
Most people, if you're not a minority, you don't think about that.
Right.
But, and by the way, my mom actually worked in the system.
Mm.
So the fact that my mom works in the system
Hmm.
and did that should say something because that speaks volumes in my framework.
Right. Yeah.
And this whole idea that she particularly got me a minivan, so outside of anybody, like just seeing the van, they're like, okay, random parent, soccer mom, whatnot.
Hmm.
You know how many times I got pulled over in that thing?
How many?
Once.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
got pulled over in that van one time.
But if you were in some other vehicle, a very strong possibility of many more times.
Yes. And other people who I know, other black people who I know in particular, oh, wait, you have a nice vehicle,
Hmm.
especially if you're younger,
Right.
pulled over by the police on a regular basis. Whose car is this? Where'd you get it? This can't be your vehicle. Okay,
Hmm.
well, it is your vehicle. Are you selling drugs? Wait,
What? That's a huge leap.
but
Yeah.
but that's actually the framework
Uh-huh.
of growing up as a black person in America is there are all of these additional, you can't have this unless you're doing this illegal because, well, you're black and you're not supposed to have this unless you're doing something that's illegal to acquire the monies that you have.
Right.
And so it's an awkward framework to actually go into places. So I'll tell you this, as a minister, when I walk into churches,
Hmm.
I more often than not have the question in the back of my head, okay, one, where's the nearest exit?
Hmm.
Two, am I going to be welcome here? And I'm like, okay. And three, is there anybody else here who looks like me
Hmm.
in any way? And, it's one of those things because let me tell you, there are people who have been run out of churches.
Right. Yeah.
But, and I think what we often do is we see the world through our experience,
Mm-hmm.
and a lack of experience can also be deemed as an experience,
Right.
because in one's experience, well, I didn't know anyone of this ethnic background, or I didn't know anyone that was in this situation. And what we often do is we read the world through the lens of our own experience. And in
Yeah.
the midst of those conversations, it's, well, I don't know anyone who's had that experience.
Yeah.
Therefore, this does not happen.
Yeah. So a perfect example, like my experience growing up, and I'm 40, so I was like at the height of MTV and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. That was my experience of what interracial stuff looked like. And in the early 90s, you would think that like we were like, we've moved past racism. That was a thing of the past. And look at what our
Yeah.
generation's doing. And and then growing up in an isolated area where I didn't see that stuff, I thought
Mhm.
that that's where we were at. And it wasn't until I joined the army and got stationed down in Louisiana and tried to go to a restaurant with one of my friends that was black,
Mhm.
and we weren't welcome at that restaurant, that I was like, oh, okay, so this is not a
Mhm.
thing of the past. This is actually going on still. And like,
Right.
I know I was like, what in the world? Like it was eye opening. It was heart crushing, and I don't even have a framework really still how to like even imagine what that looks like. Um, I know it's an injustice, and I feel injustice, like unjustly judged via my friend in a way, because we were trying to go have a good time together. But it was like,
Actually, you were.
yeah, and
You were.
but it was eye opening, and I think that that's kind of like prior to that experience, anytime if I would like fast forward 20 years or 15 years, 10 years, whatever, if I was looking at the news today and I had not had those experiences, I would
Mhm.
probably be seeing things through my lens, like you were
Right.
talking about, and not fully understanding. Not saying I fully understand now, but I think I have a clearer picture. And I think that's where the issue often arises. And when we don't slow down and listen to each other and
Mhm.
try to see it from someone else's, when we start pulling out the statistics, like you're saying, um, because I don't see that happening in my world. Like I have a black friend or whatever friend that doesn't have this problem or doesn't agree with this, or like, and we take that one
Right.
example that we have and we try to paint it over everything. So.
And I think that's vitally important. You just raised something that I really want to address as far as conversations and moving forward with this type of discussion.
Hmm.
When you have a friend
Hmm.
who agrees with you on something,
Hmm.
and they just so happen to be of another ethnicity,
Hmm.
their opinion does not suddenly speak for everybody else in that ethnic group.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing, and I see this often, and I have to remind people, like, wait, let's stop and think about this for a moment.
Hmm.
If I have a friend who is of a different ethnic group
Hmm.
and they are agreeing with me, but somebody else of their ethnic group disagrees,
Hmm.
I don't have the authority or the power to invalidate the position of the other person because, well, this person in your ethnic group agrees with me. Because what it really does is it puts you as the person who's in power, who determines who has the right position and
Right.
who has the wrong position. You want to
Yeah.
stop a conversation, that will stop it really quickly.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's really important. Depending on where we come from, I think I've seen that on social media a whole lot. People
Mhm.
using that kind of experience to invalidate like this kind of a discussion and digging
Right.
deeper. And I think that, like you said, it all of a sudden puts you in the seat of the judge, and you're getting to pick and choose who's right and who's wrong. And maybe both of their experiences are right, if you will, for where they grew up and how they grew up. Maybe it's somewhere in the
Mhm.
middle, but like really, like again, it's not about like using the analogy of the marriage. It's not about me telling my wife like you're wrong, like your feelings are wrong. Like, but let's dig a little bit deeper. Why are you frustrated? And how? Just like in a marriage relationship, if I truly love my spouse, I don't want her to feel these ways, and so I have to ask myself, how can I love my wife in such a
Mhm.
way to bring about resolution or healing and mend that relationship that was supposed to be united and strong that's been broken. And
Right.
as Christians, um, we're all created in God's image. God wasn't a white man, he wasn't a black man or any other color, but he
Right.
created us for relationship with him, but
Mhm.
also to be in unity with each other and in relationship with each other. And
Right.
the question is how are we going to love each other so that that true unity can
Mhm.
exist? One of the things I often tell people is um, that unity isn't everybody agreeing. That's not
Right.
unity. That's conformity. Unity
Mhm.
is differences and disagreements coming together and rising above those things. Um,
Right.
if and still loving each other even if there's differences, if that makes sense, and going deeper, that's true unity. But yeah.
So what you're saying is that unity means that I don't have to be just like you in everything that I do and say.
Right, exactly.
Wait, so we can still maintain our diversity and be united?
Yeah, yeah.
Now here's the funny thing about it. Yeah, people's minds are blown by that very concept because they
Right,
see unity as uniformity,
right.
and we all have to be the same. We all have to say the same thing. No one. It's almost like the Borg from Star Trek. Sorry, I'm like kicking out Star Trek.
Dude, I'm on a Star Trek kick right now. I'm like introduce my kids to Next Generation. We've been watching one like every other day, so it's
Oh,
totally
nice.
cool and on point.
Okay,
So
but I think that what we have to do is look at and explore and see. Okay, this person is different than I am.
mhm.
That doesn't invalidate anyone. That doesn't make anyone less than or more than.
Right, yeah.
And I think that that's the key thing that people have to embrace,
Mhm,
because while we look at a system, and all systems have power,
mhm,
power is not bad. And
mhm.
people talk about power and privilege on a consistent basis.
Right, that's like hot topic.
Power is not bad.
Yeah,
Privilege is not bad. The issue is, how are you using,
or abusing.
not using, yeah, your power and your privilege.
Right.
So an abuse of power is bad, and abuse of privilege is bad. To not, well, actually that's still abuse. I'm like, to not utilize your power or your privilege in a way that helps someone else that lacks power and privilege is also bad.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
when you look at it, because I mean, with power comes responsibility, and that's part of your responsibility.
yeah, yeah.
So if you don't utilize what power and privilege you have in a capacity that is beneficial for those around you,
Mhm.
now we have moved into abuse. And that's how we get to the issue of sin.
Yeah.
That's how we get to the issue of what can what can harm other people.
Mhm.
Now we've moved into an issue of morality, of right and wrong. Now we're dealing with ethical issues related to the entire framework.
Yeah.
So, like in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, I look and I see, okay, well, there's no reason to charge, there's no reason to arrest.
Mhm.
Like, did you just see what I saw?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I always come back and I ask this question because I've seen this beforehand. Um, if the people were different ethnicities,
Mhm.
would you still say that principle applies?
Right.
And I think we have to start asking ourselves those questions, no matter who we are. And
Yeah.
if there's a different answer, then why is there a different answer? Is there a foundational basis or reason behind there being a different answer? And I think
Yeah.
there is a difference between the issue of one's heart
Mhm.
and their societal standing and what they can do. So when
Mhm.
people look at sociology, and I'm sure you've heard this statement, black people can't be racist.
Oh, I've heard that. Yeah.
And the thing is, what we ought to do, especially as Christians,
Mhm.
if you're following after Jesus or you're reading the Bible, you're like, well, no, because this is a sin and in your heart and da 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 da. And it's like,
Mhm.
yes. And I'm like, but that's not what that statement is referring to.
Mhm.
That type of statement refers to a sociological understanding of racism.
Mhm.
How does it work in society?
Mm-hmm.
If you are and so let me give some feedback on that statement, because I know that that's the statement that people are like, ah,
Mm-hmm.
if you hate someone, but you have no power to impact them,
Mm-hmm.
what difference does it make
Mm.
within the framework of society?
Right.
Now, you know, what's in your heart, you're going to have to take that up with God, like
Right.
plain and simple.
Right.
But
So,
sociologically, if I have hatred towards you, but I have no power to enact that hatred towards you, it doesn't affect you.
so, oh, sorry.
No,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, let's take what we're saying and apply it to that statement, right? Because there's going to be a lot of people that come back and say, "No, no, no, you're wrong." And if they say that, then they're missing the point, right? They're going
Mhm.
back to the facts or whatever, and they're saying, "I don't like." They're saying that your feelings don't matter, and I don't want to understand your feelings. So even if
Right.
there's a disagreement on what you just said, there's an underlying feeling that comes along with that. And if I jump automatically to defending or agreeing with that statement, then I'm missing the point. Because
Right.
what you're saying is like we live in a place where we feel that we don't have this we don't have any power, that we are at the whims and the mercy of some other people group because of the color of our skin. And if they
Precisely.
feel that, then the question is, how do we go about, how do you address it from there? But if you jump automatically and say, no, 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 like you're wrong on that
Mhm.
statement, then you're kind of missing the point. And that's where we get caught every single time, right?
That's where people start talking past each other, because of the fact that people are so lost or in the whole issue of, wait, well, that's wrong. But maybe the better question to ask in such a conversation or
Mhm.
in response to a statement is, wait, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you explain that a little more?
Hmm.
Because if we don't have explanation, what we do is we impose our definitions, our frameworks,
Yeah.
and what we think onto what the other person is doing and saying. And now we're once again taking everything through our own lenses, instead of actually, we're hearing the words, but we're not listening to what's being said to us.
Right. Right. Yeah. So no, I think that's a really like this is kind of going starting to get a little long. I know that we could keep on talking about this forever, and
Yeah.
we're not going to solve it all in one session or anything like that. But
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point to kind of like maybe start wrapping it up, because
Mhm.
I think that really just kind of drives the point home. Is oftentimes we hear a statement and we get up in arms, or we want to agree with that statement really fast and really quickly, and we don't really listen to the underlying, like what's going on underneath that, what's driving the person to say that, or
Mhm.
and then we just miss the point, and then we still don't do anything. As you said, we do the thoughts and prayers and that kind of situation. So
Yeah.
as we wrap up, two questions.
Yes.
What tips or advice do you want to give those that want to um, be a part of the healing process in this world? And I'd say, like, um, I think there's two groups of people that we're really talking about, right? Those that don't understand or see it, but they're not affected by it. And then those that are affected by this
Mhm.
and see it from, as you talked about earlier, like the Exodus perspective, if you will. And it's
Right.
not just Black people. I like growing up around Native Americans, having them in my family and all that stuff. Like I see it, I see it a little bit differently, but they were oppressed to things of that nature. Like
Right.
how do
Absolutely.
what tips and advice do you want to give both groups moving forward, so that way we can move forward into healing? Not like it's going to be solved overnight, but what can we start maybe implementing in our life?
Right. I think the first thing is to listen,
Hmm.
engage in conversation and listen.
Hmm.
This means that you're going to hear things that rub you the wrong way,
Hmm.
that you don't like,
Hmm.
that, I mean, will literally sometimes show you yourself.
Right.
But I think it's important for all parties involved to listen.
Hmm.
Don't tell people to get over anything, no matter who they are, no matter what color they are. Don't tell people to get over
Uh,
anything, because that just communicates, I don't really care about your situation. I'm just ready to move on.
right.
And I think the third thing I would say is be open to reconciliation.
Hmm.
And that takes time.
Yeah.
and people say time heals all wounds, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but we have to be open to reconciliation. We have to be open to listening and hearing each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are going to be the key things. And some people are already doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's vitally important. I think there are a couple of resources I would like for people to actually take
definitely.
a look.
Please do. Yeah.
James Cone wrote a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely needs to be read, particularly by white Americans.
Okay.
Austin Channing Brown actually wrote I'm Still Here,
Mm-hmm.
Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely read that. One of the things I would encourage everyone, no matter what their ethnic background is to watch Jane Elliott's Blue Eye, Brown Eye Experiment.
Okay.
Basically, she was an elementary educator who was in a school full of white children, and she wanted to teach about racism. So she divided students based on their eye color.
Yeah.
And you begin to see the dynamic of what happens to students, even their performance in the classroom, as they encounter privilege or as they encounter, discrimination based on their eye color in the classroom. And she demonstrates through this, and she continues to do this experiment today. I'm like, how old is this lady? With people. But I think that's definitely a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And then 4 movies I would recommend people watch.
Okay.
Everybody. Mm-hmm. Amistad, Ghosts of Mississippi, Rosewood, Selma, and actually I'm going to add a 5th, Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation, the early version, not the more contemporary, but the early version.
So what I'll do for everybody is in the notes below, I'll put links for all that stuff, so that way you know where to find it or to order it or something like that. But yeah, I think oftentimes we hear these suggestions and we never act on them. Some of these things are going to be like super easy to access and probably free or open source. So do yourself a favor and challenge yourself. Don't be stuck in your own little worldview and disagree. But I think what Dan's saying and what I'm saying is we need to hear the other side. And sometimes that hurts or sometimes that's hard, but it's going to be good for us if we do so. And so very cool. So is if people want to follow you, do you have any, are you on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook?
I am.
Stuff?
I actually recently started a new Instagram and new Twitter account. So I probably toss those out there. It's at Doc Dan Mo.
Okay, cool. And we'll put that in the links down below too. So
awesome.
But hey, Dan, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know we talked about it and we had this happen in less than 24 hours, which was pretty cool. So thank you for making the time to do this. But I really think this is a timely conversation that we all should be having, not just with each other, but in our families and with each other, and really looking at not talking past each other, like we said, but really seeing it from other people's perspectives and loving each other. And I know it's my desire of my heart, and I know it's the desire of so many people's hearts, is that we really do have unity, not uniformity, but unity. And the only way that we're going to get that is by doing what we've talked about today a little bit, having these kind of conversations, right? And so carry this forward into your community, because whoever you are that's watching this, you have the power to transform a community. We've seen that so many times throughout history. Don't underestimate yourself. And so thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll see you next time. Hopefully we get together and have lunch or coffee again soon. So you're always welcome here in the Northwest, or to join the Army Chaplain Corps.
No, go Navy.
Okay. Well, we'll see you later.
See ya.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know this subject can be a hot button, but I think it's a discussion that we need to have. Racism is a thing of our past and a thing of our current culture, and it's something that we need to deal with. So make sure to check out the notes below for the resources that Dan mentioned, and also like and subscribe to this channel if you like this stuff. And finally, please share this, because it's not just a discussion between Dan and myself and you for watching, but other people need to be a part of this discussion as well. So thank you very much. We'll see you guys next time, and bye. Fall down.
you back up again.